Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah wa barakatuh. We perceive our reality through our mind, and we live our existence within this lifetime through our mind. Our memory of who we are is in our mind. Our cognitive abilities, our senses, all have their functioning through our mind. If we take the time to try and understand how it is we function, we, in looking at how we function, can determine very quickly that everything goes through our mind. Everything is perceived, touched, smelled, felt, seen, and it comes through our mind. Our mind lives this life as if it were eternal. And we go on doing things as if there were an eternal nature to our being. Yet we have proof all around us, everywhere we look, everywhere we go, that this life is not eternal. And we are very cognizant of the fact that this life is not eternal, but the mind cannot perceive death. The mind doesn't understand what death is. So it goes on perceiving as if there is no death. But in fact, there is. However, the sheikhs, my sheikh in particularly, Muhammad Rahim Bawa Muhaiyaddeen, has taught us that there is a place that is beyond death. There is a place where we are, in fact, eternal. And during this lifetime, within this body, we have to learn and understand what the process is for reaching that state which is eternal. The body has certain feelings within it. It has certain qualities within it. And again, all of these relate back to the mind. They go through the mind. The Sufis talk about dying before death. The point being that if death comes before death, there is no need for the angel of death to come and to bring about death. So the question that comes, that arises that becomes self-evident is, what is this death before death? And how does this death before death occur? How can we die and yet still be walking this earth in this body? What are the things that have to occur for that to happen? Bawa tells us that for that to happen, we have to put the mind to sleep. We have to put the mind into a state where it no longer affects us, where it no longer is the center of our being and the center of our perception and response state. This can occur in this lifetime, but for it to occur, a lot of things have to take place. An example is that if you take a cobra or a poisonous snake, those who are familiar with cobras in the part of the world where cobras come from know that certain smells from certain roots put them into a state where they become dormant. When they are in this dormant state, you can pull out their poisonous fangs, and they still, when they wake up, look like a snake, act like a snake externally, but there's something missing from within the snake, and that's the poison. That's this ability to inflict the wound that poisons inflict. Well, within us, we also have this ability to inflict poison. We have this ability to cause harm. We have this ability to do what a snake does, which is injure those around us. And we carry these qualities within us. They are within our body, they are within our mind, and they exist within all man. And they're given different names. Sometimes they're called the nafsamara, the lower self. And this lower self has this constant way of rising within us and becoming our consciousness, becoming who we are. And this lower self contains a whole army of qualities that work through the mind, through our body, and have a lot to do with how we live in the world. And to describe some of these, they are our egoism, our suffering, our addiction to illusion, our lust, our anger, our miserliness, our delusion, our hatred for others, religious fanaticism, our own ignorance, being intoxicated, murder, thievery, lying, and so on. All of these things happen within us. Now, we have to be put into a state of sleep to remove those qualities from us. And this state of sleep, in essence, means to put the mind at rest, to somehow jail the mind or get it out of the way of our being. And once we can do this, we have ended the mainstay of what we consider our existence. Think of yourself without a memory of yourself. Think of yourself without an egocentric push to move yourself forward in this world as a distinct, separate entity, different than every other entity around it, that is in competition with every entity around it for whatever it is that you want, for whatever it is that you need to gratify your desire, need, impulses. So think about who and what we are. We are in a constant state of trying to gratify our desire, need, impulses. And we do it through our perceptions, through our mind, through our senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting. We gratify our sensual desires and needs. That's how we act, and that's who we are. Now, if we can go to a place that is beyond those sensual needs, that is beyond the need to fulfill the desires that arise in our body and are interpreted through our mind and then are grasped for through our being, if we can do away with those, there is a fundamental change in what we are. By doing away with those things, we become dead to the world in the same way that if we were asleep, we would be dead to the world. When you're asleep, your sensory perceptions with the world are cut off. There is a space, a time of repose away from those. Now, dreaming may take over, but you don't consider your dream real. It's like if you went to sleep and you were dreaming that you were carrying bags of gold, and then you woke up and all of a sudden that gold isn't there. Well, that's totally understood. Well, imagine in this life, if you were dreaming, or if your reality was that you were striving to carry bags of gold, or you were striving for any sensual pleasure within this world. And imagine if your connection to those desires disappeared. If your connection to those desires no longer existed, then what holds you to this world? What holds your connection to this world? How are you held in place in this time and space? How are you defined And how are you then not defined? If we are no longer defined by our existence within this sensory illusory world, then there is no longer a need for death, because we are no longer alive in the sense of our attachment or connection to this world. There's no longer a loss in our detachment from this world, because we have lost our connection to the need for sensory fulfillment. We've lost our connection to egoistic control of our environment. We've lost our connection to the interplay of ourselves and everyone else as if we were distinct entities. And when that happens, you also lose your connection to this body. So phases change. The true you comes into being. And what is the true you? What is the true any of us? It is that part of us that lives within the heart, that soul that is within the heart, that recognition of the internal entity that is within us that we are barely cognizant of, except in higher moments of transcendence, when this part of us overwhelms this part of us. So if we can do away with this part of us by putting this part of us to sleep, this part of us, this heart part of us, can become alive. And when that is alive, it no longer needs this body. It's independent of this body. It's not attached to this body. The mind is attached to this body, and the mind sees this body as its life force, as its life form. The heart doesn't. The heart understands that this body is just a resting place for this life force in this heart, and we can move on without it. So there's no need for a death anymore. There's just a need for a change of state. A change of state to another body, or a change of state to a bodiless form. This is what can occur to us if we release ourselves from the ego and the arrogance and the illusion and the delusion and all of the qualities that we maintain to maintain ourselves as a unique, separate entity from every other entity around us, to maintain ourselves in a way that we are somehow separate from all other things in existence. This is not something that people can do in a day, unless Allah gives them incredible insight. But to do it, you have to ask Allah for the courage to move forward in this way. It's very hard for people to give up everything that they've known and everything that they've understood and let themselves go into that free, open space where unity exists as opposed to where separation exists, where differences exist. The mystic takes you to the place beyond differences. The mystic explains to you the place beyond differences. The mystic brings you to the place where there are no separations. And if we are to become mystics, if we are to become the ones who understand reality and understand the truth, we have to understand that place beyond death. And that place beyond death is that place where separations disappear. Now, let's look at the world simply. Somebody lives a life, and if we were to follow them and begin to understand what their life is about, we would understand the drama and the complications of their life and all of the intricacies of their life and all of the various things they think about and are involved in. Now, one day, death comes. What happens to all those thoughts? What happens to all those dramas? What happens to all of those intricacies? They disappear. What happens to all of that ego-driven, desire-driven action that they were involved in, that carried them through their existence and pushed them constantly in this life? Boom. It stops. It disappears. So we can, through our reason, through our wisdom, understand that this phase is coming for us. This phase where all of the dramas in our own life, all of the intricacies in our own life, all of the dreams and imaginations in our own life are going to cease. Now, they're going to cease whether we get involved in ceasing them voluntarily or not. It's not an option. So we have to take it upon ourselves to develop reason, to develop wisdom, to develop understanding, to begin to know the true nature of this arc that is our life and where it's going. And we need to get control of it, and we need to become the ones who make it go in a direction towards reality as opposed to a direction that is constantly getting deeper and more involved with illusion. And we can only do this if we set up our wisdom to watch what we're doing and to remove from ourselves all of the qualities that come from illusion as opposed to from reality, God's reality. So our wisdom has to understand that everything that separates us from other men separates us from reality, separates us from God. Everything that we want that will make us bigger, will give us more, is an illusory grasp at a impermanent solution to an impermanent life, which we are incapable of understanding in its impermanence because Our mind can't grasp our death. Our mind only thinks it can exist eternally. And any other idea is a shock to it that knocks it back on its heels and makes it stop thinking about this and goes into a sensual, pleasure-seeking mode. We have to figure out for ourselves how to release this constant, mind-driven need to separate ourselves from everything and everyone as if we were a unique entity. And once that's done, once the mind, the influence of the mind, is put to sleep and the connection to sensory pleasure is put to rest, the true part of ourselves will begin to function and will begin to guide us towards truth. And then there's no longer a need for this body because we exist in God's reality. So there's no longer a need for death because we've already died to the world. And this somehow needs to be understood by all of us, because everything else is merely an introduction towards this reality. Religions are an introduction towards moral behavior. Moral behavior is an introduction to ridding ourselves of non-moral behavior. Ridding ourselves of non-moral behavior is an introduction to not being attached to our egocentric self. Not being attached to our egocentric self is an introduction to beginning to lose our attachment to desire and need and the qualities that are not transcendent. So to go to the place where the qualities are transcendent, we have to fall out of the influence of the mind and fall under the influence of the heart. And then the heart becomes that main center point of the way that we work. Now, let's talk a little bit about prayer. We all pray. We all ask. We all become involved in imploring our Lord for certain things. Now, if we believe that Allah, God, is all-knowing, all-powerful, understands everything, knows our needs before we do, should we ask him directly for things? Or should we leave things up to him? Who knows better what we need than our Creator? Do we know better than our Creator? If we knew better than our Creator, would we be in the state of having needs? The point being that we have to understand how true prayer works. And true prayer is a surrender to Allah, so that Allah's will becomes our will and we lose our insistence on things going the way that our mind perceives them as they should be. This takes us back to what we were just talking about, which is beginning to disappear in the fact that our will no longer precedes us. Our will no longer travels with us wherever we go. We have begun to reside in that greater will, that greater understanding, that omnipotent understanding, that eternal understanding. We have voluntarily given up our illusory manifestation. We have voluntarily given up our connection to illusion, our connection to desire, our connection to need, our connection to our sensual pleasures, and our connection to all of the things that separate us from unity and create us as individual beings unto ourselves, somehow detached from everyone else, separate from everyone else, and outstanding as our ego portrays us. We have to understand these concepts. We have to be able to hold on to these concepts. This is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom brings these concepts into being. And then once we develop an affinity to this way of thinking, we begin to develop an affinity towards transforming ourselves to become these ideas, to become these qualities, to become these understandings. And then we see that there is no separateness. There is no separation. There's a unity that exists that is beyond all of this illusion and beyond all of this separation. And we begin to see the nature of things that try to separate us. We understand that bigotry tries to separate us. We understand that caste systems try to separate us. We understand the inherent nature of religion that tries to separate us, as opposed to the deep understanding with the inner religion, which tries to unify us. And we begin to understand that even though this world consists of many, many, many different colors of people, many, many different cultures of people, many, many different ways, languages of people, or ways people see things, that there is an inherent unity in all of them that is beyond these superficial differences. And we need to learn to die to these superficial differences, as opposed to trying in this world to kill all the superficial differences, which is what the world ends up doing all the time. The wars exist because everybody wants to do away with these superficial differences. So we end up with one unified set of beings that are all the same. We have words for it. One of them is genocide. And there is a constant attempt by man to implement his superiority of his way over all other men. This fanaticism, whether it be race fanaticism or religious fanaticism or language fanaticism or location fanaticism, is what brings about the destruction in this world. So, as opposed to destroying the world, we need to begin to destroy that which is within us, which is fanatic. We need to destroy that which is within us, which wants to maintain separation. We need to destroy that which is within us, which wants to murder everything that's different than us. This is a hard thing to do because of the influence of the world on us. So we also have to learn not to be involved in the world. The world is an illusion. And as long as we stay within the specter of that illusion, our life is going to be illusory. And that life has to come to an end. So if we can end that illusory life before the time comes for the angel of death to take that life, we can become eternal. This is the path that we're on, and these are some of the things that we have to do to go on that path. We ask God to make our wisdom strong enough to overcome all of the difficulties that we have in seeing the truth. We ask Him to give us the courage to pull from ourselves all of the things that hold us in this illusory world, that attach us to this illusory world. We ask Him to make us free of illusion and pure, so that all of the things that separate us from our fellow man disappear. We need Him, we have to ask Him to relieve us of our egocentric self, of our fanatical self, of our delusionary self, of all of the things that cloud us and veil us from seeing reality and seeing our place in reality. We have to ask Him to do this for us constantly. These are the things that we have to ask for, as opposed to the desire, sensual, need things that most men ask for. May He grant to each of us the ability to become viable within our heart and to understand the truth of who we are. Because when we discover who we are, we will discover our Lord and we will live within our Lord. May it be so for each of us. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.